Before this day, Officer Daniel Hayes believed he had tasted every flavor life could serve. The sweet victories, the bitter losses, the numb cold days that melted into routine. But on a winter afternoon in an abandoned lot, life handed him the coldest flavor he had ever known. What he found there didn't just change his shift, it changed his heart forever. If stories that remind you of humanity still matter, make sure you subscribe now, because this one will stay with you long after it ends. Life, Daniel often thought, was like ice cream. Everyone loved it, but not everyone got the same flavor. Some people grew up tasting vanilla days, safe and predictable. Others were handed rich chocolate moments filled with comfort. And then there were people like him, who learned early that life could be hard as rock, solid, frozen bitterness, the kind that numbs your tongue before you even know what you're tasting. Officer Daniel Hayes had been on the force for 12 years, long enough to know that most days weren't heroic. They were paperwork, traffic stops, arguments between neighbors, and the quiet hum of a city trying to survive itself. He wore his badge like a uniform scoop, neat on the outside, but inside, his life had lost its sweetness. His wife had left 3 years earlier, tired of his silence and late nights. His daughter lived across the state with her mother, and phone calls had become awkward, melting away before they could turn warm. That morning had started like any other: gray skies, cold wind, coffee that tasted burned no matter how much sugar he added. As he drove his patrol car through the industrial side of the city, Daniel felt that familiar frozen flavor settle in his chest. The kind of day where nothing dramatic happens, but everything feels heavy anyway. The radio crackled just after noon, a report of possible trespassing near an abandoned lot behind an old factory. Kids sometimes dared each other to sneak in there. Homeless people sometimes passed through. Usually it was nothing. Daniel sighed, turned the wheel, and headed toward the address. He didn't know it yet, but this was the moment life decided to change the recipe. The lot sat between rusted chain, link fences, and crumbling brick walls. Weeds pushed through cracked concrete like stubborn survivors. Daniel parked and stepped out, the cold biting through his gloves. He scanned the area, expecting to find nothing. Then he heard it. At first it was so faint he thought the wind was playing tricks on him. A sound like a breath struggling to become a cry. He followed it toward a pile of broken pallets and torn plastic sheets near the far fence. That's when he saw her. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. Curled into herself, knees pulled to her chest, wrapped in a jacket far too thin for the weather. Her hair was tangled, her face smudged with dirt, her eyes too big for her small, fragile frame. She looked like someone who had been left out in the cold far too long, like ice cream forgotten in a freezer until it lost all softness. Daniel froze. He had responded to shootings, overdoses, car wrecks. But this was different. This wasn't chaos. This was quiet suffering, the kind that doesn't scream for attention but breaks you when you finally see it. He approached slowly, lowering himself to one knee so he wouldn't scare her. His voice, usually firm and controlled, came out softer than he expected. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The girl didn't answer. Her eyes flicked to his badge, then back to the ground. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edges of the jacket. Daniel noticed her lips were pale, her cheeks sunken. He recognized the signs from training, from cases he wished he could forget. She was starving. "What's your name?" he asked gently. A long pause. "Lily," she whispered, her voice barely there. Daniel felt something crack inside him. Lily, such a simple name, like vanilla ice cream, the kind of flavor that should mean comfort and safety. "How long have you been here, Lily?" She shrugged, a tiny movement that carried too much weight. "Since yesterday, maybe before." The coldest flavor hit him then. The realization that while the world kept spinning, this child had been sitting in the cold, invisible. Daniel took off his coat without thinking and draped it around her shoulders. She flinched at first, then relaxed as the warmth reached her skin. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "Hungry," she whispered. That word did something to him. Hungry wasn't dramatic. Hungry wasn't loud. But hungry could kill you just as easily. Daniel stood up and keyed his radio, requesting medical assistance and backup. As he waited, he stayed with Lily, talking softly, asking about her favorite things. She spoke in short sentences, like words were expensive. She liked drawing, she liked cats, she liked ice cream. That last part surprised him. "What flavor?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Strawberry. Because it's sweet, but not too sweet." Daniel smiled for the first time that day. Backup arrived, followed by an ambulance. Paramedics checked Lily's vitals and confirmed she was severely malnourished but stable. As they loaded her onto a stretcher, she reached out and grabbed Daniel's sleeve. "Don't go," she said, and just like that, his heart melted. He promised her he'd be right there. At the hospital, social services got involved. Lily had been reported missing 2 months earlier, but the case had gone cold. Her mother struggled with addiction. Her father was unknown. Lily had bounced between relatives until no one wanted her anymore. She'd run away after being locked out one night, convinced she was better off alone. Daniel listened to the story in the hallway, each detail another shard of ice pressed against his chest. This wasn't just neglect. This was a system that had let a child slip through its fingers. When Lily was cleared to eat, a nurse brought her a tray with soup, crackers, and juice. Daniel watched as she ate slowly, carefully, like she was afraid the food might disappear if she rushed. "Can I stay with her?" he asked the nurse. She nodded. As Lily finished, she looked up at him. "You're nice," she said. He swallowed hard. "I'm just doing my job." She shook her head. "No, you stayed." Those words echoed louder than any siren. Days passed, and Daniel couldn't shake the image of Lily curled up in that abandoned lot. He followed her case closely, checking in with social workers, advocating when he could. He visited her in the temporary foster home where she was placed, bringing coloring books and pencils. One afternoon he brought ice cream. "Strawberry," he said, handing her the cup. Her eyes lit up like he'd given her treasure. She took one careful bite, then smiled wider than he'd ever seen. "This tastes like summer," she said. Daniel laughed softly. It was the first genuine laugh he'd had in years. But life wasn't done twisting the story. 2 weeks later, Daniel was called into his captain's office. A complaint had been filed. An anonymous tip claimed he was getting too personally involved in a case, crossing professional boundaries. The words hit him like a freezer door slamming shut. He tried to explain. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He just cared. The department launched an internal review. Daniel was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Suddenly, the sweetness he'd found was threatened. He worried he'd lose his badge. Worse, he worried he'd lose Lily. When he told her he couldn't visit for a while, her face fell. "Did I do something bad?" she asked. "No," he said quickly. "Never. This isn't your fault." But the cold had returned. During his leave, Daniel spent long nights thinking about his life, about how he'd let himself become numb, about how easy it was to accept the frozen flavors and stop hoping for sweetness. The investigation dragged on. Weeks passed. Then something unexpected happened. Lily's caseworker contacted Daniel. Lily had asked to see him. She'd been withdrawn, refusing to eat properly again. Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to make things worse. But then he remembered her words, "You stayed." He requested permission for a supervised visit. When Lily saw him, she ran into his arms. "I thought you forgot me," she said. "Never," he replied. That visit changed everything. The caseworker noticed how Lily opened up around Daniel, how she ate better, laughed more, slept better. She documented it. A psychologist evaluated Lily and recommended maintaining the bond for her emotional well-being. At the same time, the internal review cleared Daniel of wrongdoing. The complaint was deemed unsubstantiated. He got his badge back. But something inside him had already changed. Daniel made a decision that scared him more than any call he'd ever answered. He applied to become Lily's foster parent. The process was long, invasive, and exhausting. Home inspections, interviews, training sessions, doubts that crept in late at night. Could he really do this? A single cop with long hours, a man who had already failed at a marriage. But every time he doubted himself, he thought of Lily in that lot, alone in the cold. Months later, the call came. He was approved. The day Lily moved into his apartment, she stood in the doorway clutching a small backpack. "Is this really my room?" she asked, staring at the bed, the posters, the desk with art supplies. "Yes," he said. "All yours." She walked in slowly, like she was afraid the floor might disappear. That night, they ate dinner together. Nothing fancy. Spaghetti and garlic bread. For dessert, Daniel brought out 2 bowls of ice cream. Strawberry for Lily, chocolate for him. She looked at him seriously. "You know," she said, "people think ice cream is just sweet. But sometimes it's cold. Sometimes it hurts your teeth. But it's still good." Daniel nodded, understanding more than she realized. Life doesn't always give us the flavor we want. Sometimes it gives us the coldest scoop imaginable. But every now and then, if you're willing to stay, to care, to open your heart, it surprises you with sweetness you never expected. Years later, Daniel would still think about that abandoned lot, about how close he'd come to driving past it without stopping, about how one moment of attention had changed two lives forever. Lily grew stronger, happier. She joined art clubs, made friends, laughed easily. Daniel learned how to be present again, how to listen, how to feel. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were hard days, arguments, fears. But there was also warmth. There was laughter. There was love. And every now and then, on a hot summer day, they'd sit on the porch with melting ice cream in their hands, sticky fingers and wide smiles, grateful for the strange, painful, beautiful recipe that had brought them together. Because sometimes, the coldest flavor is the one that teaches you how sweet life can really be. If this story touched you even a little, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Which part of the country are you in today?